Hi everybody, my name is Elisa. Welcome back. This channel is all about me creating my dream wardrobe from scratch, and I'm taking you along for the ride. I also create my own digital sewing patterns that I sell on Etsy. I have been a little bit on and off these last couple weeks, or actually almost a month, because I had a very bad stint of the flu twice in the last 6 weeks, and let me tell you, it was not fun. However, I didn't just lay back and did nothing. I actually had a creative flurry and figured I wanted to do something really crazy before the end of the year. So I started working on a number of sewing patterns that I'm going to release before Christmas. If you know anything about me, I have shared 3 sewing patterns so far this year. I've never done this before. This was a completely new part of my YouTube journey for me. And I learned so much over the course of making these 3 sewing patterns that I felt like, why not make 5 more before the end of the year? So my plan is to share with you my holiday season sewing pattern extravaganza over the next 6 weeks. We're gonna start today with a dress that you have actually seen before. A couple of weeks ago, I shared my Halloween spooky season aesthetic destashing makes. I made 3 things in that video, and the last one was this gorgeous V-necked slip dress that I made from a beautiful Liberty silk. And a lot of you really love that design, and I personally have to say it's one of my absolute favorites that I've ever made. It's become an instant wardrobe staple. I'm actually wearing it right now. So I figured, why not digitize the pattern, make it available for you guys. I think it's a universally flattering design. It is also a really good layering piece for the colder season, which makes it a holiday fit for me. I just love slip skirts, but even better if it comes with a top and you can just throw a chunky knit over it, or a cardigan, some tights and boots, and you're gonna look really put together and nice. Today I'm gonna make a midnight blue version of the dress, and I'm gonna take you through the process of making it step-by-step tutorial style. The dress is called Sally and is available in sizes extra small to 3XL European. My size chart is featured on my Etsy shop, which you can find through the link in my description box. All right, before I lose any more words, let's just get started. The first thing that you will want to do after having purchased the Sally dress from Etsy is you will want to download the PDF file and print it. There are 3 different sizes available: European DIN A4, A0, as well as US letter. You can go and print the pages on your home printer, or you can take it to a copy shop. You just have to make sure that your print is scaled to 100%. There is a scaling box on the PDF, so you can be sure that everything is correct and it's not shrunken in any way. Each PDF features an explainer page that tells you how to put the pages together if you choose not to go to a printer but instead print your pattern at home, which I assume most of you will be doing. And it's a pretty straightforward process, which I still have to do, so let's go. Once you've printed your pages, you can put them together really easily by just following the puzzle system. In every corner of your page, you're going to find a number. Each number exists up to 4 times, and I'm saying up to 4 times because in the pattern PDF, empty pages have been removed. So if you put the 4 or 3 according pages together, you're going to end up with a complete pattern piece. And that's how this works. Quick break before we get to sewing it all together. Alright, the beautiful thing about this pattern is that it comes together so quickly and easily, and that's good for me because I have been procrastinating, and it is now almost dinner time, and I think I can do this just under an hour. So let's do this. As you've seen, I've just removed the paper pattern from the front skirt panel. Look at this yummy stretch satin. Just looks so nice, the dark blue. I really love it. I do the same thing for my front bodice bust pieces. I remove the paper pattern and I go ahead, open the 2 sides, and then I start by placing them right sides facing with my skirt panel, making sure that the underbust seams are aligned. So I have my center front notch point here, and what I do is I place the center front part of my bust right where the notch point is, and that means that 1 centimeter is going to overlap right here, and we need that for the lining later on. I can then start to pin the underbust seam, and I start by, obviously, like I said, doing the center front and then moving right over to my side seam right away. From there I start pinning this section flat, and then like magic, ease will appear. There's ease in the underbust section of the top piece, but not in the skirt, and that is on purpose because we want to have a little bit of a ruffle that gives us a lifted effect and replaces a dart in that section. So what you want to do is, once you started to pin and you have it like this, you can then go ahead and find an even distance that you can apply for both of your sides to make sure that the ruffle is right under the apex of your bust. For me, that's around 7 to 8 centimeters from my breastbone. Once I have pinned the bust piece flat up until this section, I can then start to pin a few pleats in. And there's not actually that many. So if we then fold it upwards, you can see there's a tiny, tiny little ruffle, but the rest of this section is flat. Once that is done, I am going to sew that down. And now when I remove my pins and I fold this up, you can see there's a little bit of a lift in the underbust section. And now I repeat the same step for the other side. And again, I am going to pin starting from my seam allowance in that section. So eventually, when you turn things around, this will be closed, but not overlapping. So center front first, then the side seam, placing a few more to get that section flat, and then measuring the same distance from the center front notch into this underbust section to make sure the pleats are placed in the same position. I purposefully did not place a notch in the pattern because the bust apex differs from person to person. So you go ahead, measure that on yourself first, and then you can be sure that you get the most flattering result for your personal need. Now the front is assembled. We have a nice little lift in the underbust section, and we can move on to the back panels. The same principle as for the front of the dress applies to the back of the dress. I'm just opening up the back skirt, and then I'm placing the two top sections of the dress, right sides touching with it. And I will sew this arm side line first. Again, in the back, we want to do the same thing as in the front regarding the seam allowance at this cross section here. So right where the center back notch is, this is where we start pinning, and we just leave the seam allowance loose. And for the back of the dress, we obviously don't have any ease because we want that section to be flat on our bodies. This is the most beautiful stretch satin, honestly. I bought this in a shop on Goldhawk Road in London, and it's so satisfying, this color. Right, sewing down the first seam and doing the same thing for the other side. So now that the front and back are sewn together, I'm going to give each of them a very careful press. Since this is stretch satin, now I don't want to overdo it, but I want to make sure that all of my underbust seams slash arm size seams in the back are facing down and are nice and flat for the next step, which is to put the front and back together. At the same time, we will also have to think about how we want to finish the dress. Obviously, there is like different options. You could either go for facing, you could go for a complete lining, you could go for a decorative border like I did with my last version of this dress. If you're a beginner, you could also just opt to give it a nice top stitch and call it a day. I'm going to opt for a half lining option, so I'm going to line the top of my dress, and I'm going to show you what material I'm using. To complete the assembly of the shell, excuse these little spots here, that's just because I just washed my hands and they were a little bit wet. We are just placing the right side of the front onto the right side of the back so that the good sides are facing. That's how we roll around here. And then I usually start by placing the arm side line slash underbust seam touching, because that's the only seam in our sides that needs to correspond. And then the rest, I'm pinning from there. Once you're like halfway through with your side seam, you can go all the way down to your hem and place a pin there, and then align everything to make sure you're not pinning all the way down and then the hem is not lined up, because that tends to happen. And when it does happen, just go back and remove a few pins and do it like this, where you place a pin at the end of the side seam down in the hem section and then retro pin the side from there to make sure everything lines up and you're not warping the side seam. This way you can make sure that it's nice and flat. For the lining, I'm going to use this really cool mesh material. It's a sort of power mesh that is slightly stretchy, but not very. So I think it's really nice for the stretch satin that I have, and it's gonna feel really comfortable on the skin. Now that I've cut my lining pieces, I'm gonna repeat all of the same steps that I did with the shell with the lining to make a replica of the dress. So I now have my shell dress and I have my lining dress, and now it's all about putting the two together. I'm going to leave the shoulders open for now, and I'm going to start by turning the lining right sides out, and then I'm going to have the lining and the shell right sides touching, and I'm going to start with the center front. So here I have my two front bodice bust sections match up with the same of the shell. And because we spent some extra time on making sure everything here in the neckline section is nicely aligned, we now have this little flower situation where the tip of the V is nice and accessible. That's going to help us to create a really neat and crisp finish here. What we want to do is to align the tip of the V and place a needle there. So now I can make sure that everything I do should work nicely in my favor. And from the tip of my V, I'm going to start placing some pins so I can nicely align the neckline of the shell and the lining with each other. One side, moving on to the other side. So once I have the neckline pinned, I can reach into the skirt and pull the shell skirt through the lining skirt so that the two actually are placed the right way, the way they should be placed, like this. And now I have a nice access to the rest of my armholes and my back neckline. And I can then start pinning and aligning everything all the way around. And the only thing I'm gonna leave open, like I said, are my shoulder seams, because those are the last seams that I'm gonna sew. So I'm now also pinning my armholes. And then I continue with my back side, and for the back the same thing applies. We have this open access to the tip of our V, and here I will want to place a needle to make sure everything's nicely aligned, and then I can pin the back necklines. Alright, now that I have pinned all the way along my necklines as well as my armholes, I can start to sew. And what I want to do is, when I sew this side of the neckline, I want to make sure that I move my seam allowance over like this, and I start exactly where my underbust seams begins. This is where I want to start sewing, not before, not after. This is exactly the point where I am going to set my needle in, and then I'm going to sew up to the shoulder. I'm going to lift my needle, leave the shoulder section open, and then I'm going to start sewing around my armhole all the way up to the back shoulder, lift again, and then continue with my back neckline, applying the same care here in the V section of my neckline. So let's go. right, now that everything is sewn together, we can start to turn things around. So I'm just reaching into the dress in between the shell and the lining, and then I start to pull it inside and out like this. But what we also want to keep in mind is that we need to snip our seam allowance in certain sections to make sure everything lies nice and flat once it is pressed. And specifically I'm talking about the armholes, because if we don't snip these, then the seam allowance will create some tension in the curves and things will start to warp. So I'm just starting to snip around the curved areas, and I'm making sure that I'm not cutting through my seam. And as these are the only curves around here, that should be enough. I don't think we need to cut our neckline seam allowance. If anything, we do want that to stay nice and crisp. So again, reaching into the dress and pulling it inside and out. And then we can push the lining into the dress, and voila, we have a beautifully lined neckline. Now the shoulders are still open, and like I said, that is intentional. Before I close them though, I do want to give this a very neat and nice press, so everything is flat and looking good. Today's the day that I'm going to finish this dress. Let's close our shoulder seams. For starters, I have some satin ribbon here, which I'm going to use to feed into my side seams to cinch in the dress a little bit, depending on how I feel that day. So I have 2 meters of this midnight blue satin band, which I'm going to cut in half. And I'm also going to angle the other ends, which are the ones that are going to hang loose outside of the dress. I'm going to fetch a lighter and melt the ends so they don't fray. Just a little bit, not too much. To actually be able to feed this into the sides, we will have to open the sides just a tiny little bit. So I'm going into the dress in between the lining and the shell, and I'm finding this point here where the underbust seam and the side seam all connect. And I'm going to open this section by 1 centimeter, which is just enough for me to feed in the satin band. I then grab one of the two and feed it through here. And I'm immediately going to close this again, just to secure the satin band. There we have our satin bands coming out of the sides of the dress. To close our shoulders, we will have to do that from the inside of the dress. So what I'm doing is, I am reaching into the dress in between the lining and the shell, and I'm finding my way up, up, up into one of my shoulders like this. I'm removing the pin that I have here, and what I want to do is I want to fold the front of the shoulder inside itself like this, so the fraying edges sort of disappear. I then take the back shoulder and feed it into the front shoulder like this. Now I reach inside the dress in between the lining and the shell, and I grab those 2 loose ends and pull them through. This way I can be sure that front and back are aligned and positioned in the right way. I then go ahead and place a few needles to secure everything. If you find that one of your shoulders is a little bit bigger or like wider of the straps than the other, you can correct this now. So I'm just making the back shoulder strap a little bit more narrow than it was. And now they fit together a little bit better. And then I simply go ahead and sew the shoulder. And when I now pull this back the right side out, you will find that our shoulders are nicely closed, like this, and ready to go. And last but not least, let's finish the hem. I'm opting for a very simple rolled hem, and I'm going to show you how to create one in 2 simple steps. Alright, we have arrived at the final step. The first thing I want to do is to serge my side seams, the insides of my side seams. If you do not have a serger, you can do that also with a zigzag stitch on your sewing machine, or you could also opt for bias tape. This is just for the section that is longer than the lining that we have created. Where the lining hits, you normally don't have to serge the seams, but I'm gonna do these like sections that are longer than my inside lining, just so that I'm on the safe side and nothing is going to fray on me. Okay, now that I've serged my side seams, I can move on to the hem. To create a rolling hem, what I want to do is to fold the length over by about 1 centimeter and sew as close to that fold as I can. Once the first stitch is done, you are going to cut the seam allowance back to its bare minimum, really closely to your first stitch. Once you've cut the seam allowance back to bare minimum, you're going to fold it over, or like roll it over once again, and give it another stitch as close to the fold as possible to finish the rolling hem. Alright, that is it. What do you think about the Sally dress? I am so excited about how this midnight blue version turned out. I think she's gorgeous. Let me know what you think about her in the comments below. Also, let me know if you consider giving the sewing pattern a go. You can find it on my Etsy shop via the link in the description box. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. Leave a comment. I'm always very excited to chat to you guys there. And if you haven't yet, please consider subscribing too. And I see you next week with pattern number 2 in our holiday season sewing pattern extravaganza. Try saying that 3 times in a row. See you then. Bye.